Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video, we are going to take a look at painting the Warmaster Titan from Adeptus Titanicus. As you can see here, we have the model all ready to go. It's mostly assembled. We've left it in mostly sub-assemblies, but here in this video, we are going to concern ourselves with the legs. So in this first part of this series, we're going to get started working on this guy, and we're basically going to prime it. I use Stynylrez white primer using an airbrush, Patriot 105 at around 25 psi. I'm going to use some Averland Sunset from Citadel Air. I'm going to use a Patriot 105, and we're going to apply this at around, I think it was around 20 psi, I do believe. Of course, somebody forgot to turn his camera on for the first bit, so that's why you see half a leg already done. Somehow some dummy forgot to turn it on, so here's just really quickly. We're moving through our project, and again, this is sort of different from what you may be used to as far as, like, you know, these big kind of mechanical bits. And also you may notice that the shields and everything, like the armor, is not attached because I just wanted to be able to get at this stuff. It's not important to get paint the underside of those feet, but for somebody out there who's probably you know, gonna set this up for a diorama or whatever, I mean, it's kind of amazing that those underneath the feet are actually painted or sculpted so that, you know, you can actually do something with it. Screaming Skull, we're using some MIG ammo airbrush thinner. Basically, we're going to do this in kind of a 1-to-1 mix ratio. It's not really a mix, but it's a thinning ratio. And with this, we are going to apply our highlight. Now, basically, I'm going to begin laying in the color straight down at the parts of the model, basically doing a kind of a zenithal type of highlighting. And with this color, because I have it thinned out so much, basically it's a slow build up to the saturation that I'm looking for. And basically all I'm doing is just laying this color in and moving it around, spraying straight down. But then it's most of these areas here, I kind of change angles, so it's probably more like less than a 45. It's more like a 20-degree angle off from the center, so that we can get into some of the nooks and crannies and things like that. And here again, I'm just you know, allowing more color. Again, I'm trying to build up around the knees, the back of those pistons, where the Achilles tendon would be, if we're equating this to obviously something organic or whatever. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's very, very light. So here we're going to come in with some Iandin yellow. It's a Citadel contrast. And basically, I'm just going to slap it right into the airbrush, keeping the same PSI. And what we're going to do is we're going to resaturate these areas. Where we have the Averland Sunset, it's going to get a little deeper, but all the areas where we have a much brighter color, it is going to become more yellow and give us those varying tones. And with this, it is a really fun way to accomplish this. Basically, it's, you know, we're getting our shadows, we're getting our highlights. I try to leave a little bit of that Screaming Skull at the highest points, just a little bit. I don't saturate too heavily, but anywhere else, kind of like basically a 90-degree angle straight in at the model, gets a little bit more color. Golden High Flow Iron Oxide brown essentially is what I'm using here. I'm switched over to a Renegade Chrome just so that I can be a little bit more accurate as far as where I'm placing this color. And we're going to spray it straight up at the model. And it's relatively straightforward. Basically, I'm just laying in some shadow. I'm laying it in at like on the underside of the feet, some of the kind of nooks and crannies and the knee joints, underneath the groin area. All these little areas I figure where I just want a little bit deeper color. You can see here, I'm just kind of picking and choosing. It's not quite like what we did with the zenithal highlight, where we're kind of just arbitrarily just spraying straight down at everything. We're not you know, spraying straight up at the model with this, because otherwise you just end up with this really kind of odd scenario where you have, you know, these deep and light tones, and it just doesn't quite work. Whereas we're deliberately laying shadows down. Again, it wasn't so that we could have, you know, really deep shadows. It was just to kind of really bring a bit more depth into some of these areas. Really wasn't entirely that necessary. Mission Models Cold Rolled Steel is next. We're going to basically apply this by brush. And I initially was laying this down because I'm a big fan of this particular color, as I've used this in the past and gotten really great results. But typically I lay it down on top of a gloss black. And once I started laying this down, it actually was very, like you could see here where those little ball joints are, you could see some of that undercolor showing through the metal. And actually was in person to the eye, it actually is more apparent. And, that just, reinforces obviously the idea that maybe we should be using black before we lay a metallic down. But, I wasn't too sure how well this would sit on top of other colors as opposed to more traditional type of miniature paints. I'm a big fan of these colors, but I really wasn't expecting this result. And I kind of figured, well, okay, I'll lay a few layers down and kind of press on. And so here I applied, I think it was like 3 layers, and it still, it looked good, but it wasn't what I was used to. And so I press on, I do a few more details around the feet and everything like that, and the knee joints and such. But then I decide jump over to Black Templar, Citadel Contrast, and we're just going to pick out a whole bunch of the areas. And in fact, I'm going to run it right on top of the previous metallic layer that I had laid out with the cold steel mission models. And basically this is just going to reinforce it. I kind of was going to initially treat it more like a shade wash on these areas to pick out and reinforce some of the deeper tone of metallics. But I decided, no, I'll just basically just cover right over the metallics and move forward. And of course, so at this point I start moving on to the other areas of the model, such as like the ankle joint, the back of the toe, and those little struts that kind of run from the inside thigh, as well as there's like little pistons on the kind of hip joints as well. Those get some metallic on them as well. That big piston on the back of his Achilles tendon there also gets coated in the Black Templar as well. And there's some other little doodads on that generator right on his bum and everything like that gets some coloring. Normally with a model of this size, I definitely would recommend using some sort of holder just so that you're not constantly manhandling this thing. Just because it's just not a good habit, and you can get some weird things happening, transference, and you can end up rubbing the paint off, and all these weird instances where it kind of can just slow you down and disrupt your process as you're working around. Now this is a really fun kit. It's been a long time since I've done a kit like this as far as complexity. Anybody who's going to pick up this kit, this is really a builder's model kit. Anybody who really enjoys building models, this kit is for them. This thing was like 4 sprues of parts, all these little tiny little parts, pistons and joins and shields and all these little things. It's a really fantastic kit, but it is definitely not something you can just kind of quickly power your way through. We jump back over to the cold rolled steel and we begin reapplying it over all the areas where we have the black. With this, basically, it's just going to be applied straight on. There's nothing fancy, nothing, terribly complex going on here. Again, it's on the ball joints, the toes, those, I don't know, whatever they are that are on the inner thighs, and the knee joints. There's like these big gear mechanisms. Basically everywhere except on that motor that's on his bum, that has like these little vents or whatever. I colored them black, but I didn't lay down metal on them or anything like that. And really quickly, it is just, fairly straightforward. We're just going to apply this and, kind of fire and forget kind of thing. Basically, we're not going to, dwell on previous errors of judgment and of, choices. I could have also went with a normal kind of metallic paint, but because I was such a fan of this particular color, I wanted to use it in this video, and I hardly ever use this paint in videos. I've demonstrated it on other models before, and it worked out well, but again, not sitting on top of a bright color such as what I've created here. Once we're happy with that, we're going to jump over to some Agrax Earthshade, some regular old Citadel. This is the regular matte variety of this color, as there is a gloss version of this as well, that we're using the matte version. basically straight from the bottle. I started applying it into some of the nooks and crannies, and this is the opportunity now, especially if you were using an airbrush to color this all in, because if you're going about this model just by paintbrush, well, then you really don't have to worry too much about this step. Here I slap a little bit onto the palette, take a generous amount of water just to thin the color out a bit, and then begin applying it. And I apply it fairly generously, but anywhere where there's a little bit of pooling, I draw the excess out, and so that I don't have any heavy pooling in anywhere. But otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. I just slap a little bit on palette, and anytime I run out of what I'm using, I basically just add a little bit of water. And really, when I'm using the water to thin this out, it is just my regular rinse water, and I just applied it here and there. And really, with this phase, it's kind of a hide your crimes kind of phase, because some of the areas inside, you can see like in behind that knee joint, the color is not quite as heavily saturated as other places on the model. That's just because the airbrush just doesn't quite get into some of those spots, versus if you would have done this by hand, you were more than likely to catch those areas and not really worry about it. But with this phase, we can actually hide those little mistakes. And plus, too, some of these areas, they're going to be completely covered by the armor, so it's really kind of I don't know, an exercise in futility to go to this step and really kind of bother with this. And on the hip joins there, I did pull some of the excess color off just so that I left some of that highlight color. But otherwise, again, it's a fairly generous amount that I'm applying to the model. And again, just picking up any excess pooling or anything like that on the model. Once we've done this to the entirety of the model and allowed it all to completely dry, we jump over to Hexos Dry. This is basically a very kind of pastel yellow, large dry brush. And I'm going with an upward brush stroke on these surfaces. Kind of it's not quite a non-metallic metal vibe, but it is kind of in that same vein. Some of the brush strokes I go up and down, but otherwise most of my brush strokes I'm in an upward direction, and that's just to get those undersides, and it creates a really nice contrast from any of the dark areas that we created earlier, and have that little nice bright edge highlight. The key really, especially when you are dry brushing, is to remove a lot of the paint from your brush. That is key when dry brushing. You're only looking to catch just the edges. Iron breakers next. We're going to slap a little bit onto our palette, and just the dampness of the brush to thin the color out. And here I'm just very quickly just scrubbing in the highlight, but we're applying it in a typical fashion, so we're applying it on the highest points of details. So it's on the upper half of each of those little ball joints. Here it's a quick little edging on those little pipes that run, not pipes, but it's like a ridge on the toe areas and such. Just really, really fast. Again, it's just a quick little edge highlighting. It's really nothing complex. I considered using something like Necron Compound to get those toes and just quickly dry brush them, but I decided just a quick edge highlight was enough to get those areas. Again, with this large model and the complexity of it and the amount of detail, it's really fantastic. Again, I don't really remember a time where there was a model like this of this complexity. Especially from Games Workshop. So it's really, really fun. Here I'm just adding a bit of thinner to our iron breaker just to thin the color out a little bit, just so that's not so thick and chunky, as it were. And here again, I'm just simply scrubbing up the highlights onto the surface. Now, when I say I'm scrubbing, but you can see there, I'm kind of just quickly moving the brush around. It's not quite a stipple. It's not quite, a regular kind of layering highlight. I'm just kind of quickly moving it around, and I'm not too worried about it being a smooth, even layering of paint on that surface. And wherever I finish the brush stroke, there's going to be the larger amount of paint deposited. So bearing that in mind, you keep your brush strokes to the high points, and you can deposit a large amount of that brighter silver. And of course, where you initially have that transition, it can create transitions on that surface, but because we're scrubbing it around, it creates an unevenness and gives a slight texturing to those areas. It's just an aesthetics choice. It's not something, if you're not used to doing metals like that, I really wouldn't worry about it. Do whatever, whatever way you prefer to do. And again, we just catch those little ball joints and just these little, gear mechanic thingies. I don't know, whatever they are. I'm sure there's other details on this that we could have done metal, but otherwise, that is it. That is the legs so far. Next video, I think we are going to work on the armor paneling for the legs. Hopefully you enjoyed this one, and stay tuned for part 2. Big thank you to my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below. And there are varying tiers of support, and a huge thank you to everybody who does. Huge, huge thank you. Take care of your brushes, and they will take care of you.